Hey there, it's Andrea, and welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast. Today, I have with me Scott Moore, who is the Senior Vice President of Corporate Relations and Chief Administrative Officer for Union Pacific. He has company-wide responsibility for internal and external communications, public affairs, media relations, and all executive services. Moore serves as president of the Union Pacific Foundation. Prior to joining the railroad, which is interesting, he was elected 2 times as Nebraska's Secretary of State, following 8 years as a state senator. So, Scott Moore, it's great to have you on the Voice of Influence podcast. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Glad to be here.
All right. So maybe if you wouldn't mind, share a little bit more about what you do with Union Pacific now and how the trajectory of your career or the things that you've done in the past really help inform who you are now as a leader.
Well, as I tell people, the chief administrative officer is a title that nobody understands. You know, if you're the marketing person, they know you do the marketing. If you're the operating guy, you do the marketing. Legal, CAO, I say I'm really the COEE, the chief of everything else in the company. And what I mean by that, I have a wide range of duties. I run the state and local government affairs in 23 states, 7,000 communities. I do all of our communications, internal, external, media, all the things we do. And then there's this job called executive services, which is the catch-all of many things. It can be the airplane fleet, the headquarters building, which I'm in charge of, our entertainment trains, our STEAM program, the Union Pacific Museum, the foundation, as we mentioned, just a wide array of many things. And then lastly, I'm chief of staff to the CEO. And so if the first 3 things didn't catch everything else, that last one does. So it's whatever, I'm 2 doors down. And so whatever the CEO needs to do, internally or externally information, that's what I do. So it really is a jack of all trades in many ways. But I would argue a couple things. One is, you mentioned I was in the legislature for 8 years. And as a legislator, you have to know a little bit about a lot of things. 800 bills come in, you don't know anything about them. You'll have meetings in the morning where you'll have scheduled 15-minute interviews and total different topics every 15 minutes. And so that, that need to filter information and crystallize it simply, sometimes oversimple, but for whatever reason, that was good training. And also, as Secretary of State of Nebraska, I always said that was a wide array of duties. It's like the kitchen drawer of state government, where chairman of the brand committee, chairman of the real estate committee, chairman of elections, a register of all the corporate records. Just a wide mismatch of things. And so, interestingly enough, both those jobs really did uniquely prepare me for this job I have at UP, where it's just, all things coming in different directions.
That's interesting. So what is something that is transcendent throughout all those positions that you really need to be able to have? It sounds like being able to analyze quickly, to, like you said, distill information quickly. And I'm assuming decision making also. What would you say about what else is needed?
Well, as with anything, when you're not the expert at the table in many things, and I'm often not, but I also have ancillary information to bring to the discussion. And so, the point is, you got to listen a lot first, and because understand. I remember I had a guy that worked for me when I first was in the legislature. He was really. Guy'd work his tail off, absolutely work his tail off to try and figure things out, and then give me the answer that may or may not be right. I have a chilling saying that people that work for me don't like. So I don't pay you for what you think. I pay you for what you know. And the point is, I got to know I'm dealing with facts, not what you think the answer is. My point is, you don't have to know the answer yourself. You just have to know who knows the answer and go get it from them. And figure it out quickly, develop the relationship that, I trust them, I can get the answer from them. And so, if you think you need to be the master of everything yourself, you're going to be the master of one thing. And so I don't pretend to know the most about everything, but I have different sets of information that makes for a bigger decision-making process. And then ultimately you have to make a decision and stand by it and have a rationale for why you're doing it. and be willing to change your mind when you're wrong.
How do you prioritize what you work on?
Probably not well is how I answer that in some ways. And so, I know, I tend to be, what I need tomorrow sort of guy. Now, so obviously I'm chief of staff to the boss. He's 2 doors down. What's on his schedule tomorrow that I need to prepare him for? That's a major driver of it. Now, also having said that, in my media world, in my political world, I don't control the timeline. I don't control when there's an incident in Iowa where we have to fly a Go plane to and give an answer to it. I didn't come in the morning with that one on my radar screen. Same thing with a bad amendment gets adopted in Oregon that we have to react to. Those are things that, it's not like I sat there and planned my day that this is what I'm going to do. So I don't get overly, hung up about a week from now, though I'm thinking about it. But I tend to be a little more, some argue tactical, because that's what I got to be. I always argue at a headquarters building of a Fortune 150 company. In many ways, I argue, we tend to practice medicine like John Hopkins here at headquarters. Very precise, very planned, eliminate all the risk you can. Whereas when you're working on the railroad out there in North Platte, Rawlings, Wyoming, Dunsmuir, California, much of the work there can be a mass unit where you simply are analyzing trauma, figuring it out, removing the leg, survival, stuff like that. And you have to find the mix between that John Hopkins precision and that mass unit. And if you get hung up either direction, you get in trouble. So that is the art of what I do in my job. There has to be some precision to it. There has to be planning to it, and there's people that I hire to do that. But also, it needs to be analyzing the situation now, and what is the timing of that decision, and how do we get it done? And so, that, like I said, there's some science to my job, but there's probably more art to it because of that.
Sure. That has me wondering, with all of the different people you encounter in making these decisions and encountering these problems, do you feel that you have to build rapport with people as you go, and quickly, or is that not something that can be a part of it because you just have to move so quickly?
Well, it does need to be part of it, and you do have to have rapport with people. One will argue the railroad particularly, and well as my political career, title gives you some right to do things, right? Certainly in the railroad, very military, you're in chain of command and things like that. And as I always tell people, I never used my title when I was in public office because I didn't want to do that. Sometimes in the railroad, I do have to use my title occasionally to get things done. But ideally, you want to do it by building a rapport. That's how you really get things. That's how you get things done. And knowing enough about people, and knowing enough about people in the room. It's one of those things. I have an odd quirk. I spent 20 years in politics, and I don't consider myself very good at memorizing names. And I said, 2 things you don't do in politics is you never say somebody's name unless you absolutely are certain that is their name, because you offend them by not knowing them. And the second thing is you never assume a woman's pregnant, because you get that one wrong, you've got an enemy for life, as you can imagine.
I think that you nailed that one.
Yes. And so, but I had almost an innate ability to remember where somebody's from. And in our conversation, I asked you where you were from. And I may see you on the street and I remember your name, but I will innately remember you're from south of the interstate, and I'll eventually get to Holdridge, and I'll eventually get to your mascot. The point being, all of that drills down to some commonality that I know who you are, know something about you. Now, in this day and age, do I stereotype by where you're from? I probably admittedly do, and that's probably a bad thing. I think I like to think I've grown beyond that. But the point is little things like that. What was the last conversation I had with that person in the room? And you reference it. And that way they know. It's beyond just getting that answer for me now. I know something about you. You and I know each other, so you're going to give some discretionary effort for me because of that relationship and that rapport. And that's what I need to be on the head of the other person who's not getting that from
Hmm. Those are interesting tactics. The being able to remember something, but certainly making some sort of connection, and perhaps a connection to a previous conversation. That seems to be part of what you're talking about when it comes to building rapport.
you. I mean, I always get those people that will repeat your name 5 times in the conversation, and I get that's what something they do. So I mean, you usually tell when somebody's doing that very deliberately, and that's fine. Whereas I, you know, the me asking where you're from is how we'll start things, and that can get dicey, particularly in this day and age, when you have people from around the globe. You have people that that's why military. Where am I from? I don't know. I was from all over the place, so people can take that wrong if you don't say it right.
Hmm. So you have all this varied experience, and certainly in the government and in corporate, and in the Nebraska Chamber of Commerce. Actually, before I ask this question, can you explain what you do with them?
Certainly, I am this year. I am the chair of the state Nebraska Chamber of Commerce, which obviously is the entity that promotes Nebraska as the face of business in Nebraska. In addition to that, I'm also on the Omaha Chamber of Commerce's executive board. And then just one other thing, at Union Pacific, in our role, in my community affairs role, we belong to 130 different state and local chambers across our system, where my battery of people are engaged in our community in that function. So obviously the reason I personally spend time at the chamber and that my organization spend time at chambers across the country is that one of the key things about Union Pacific is we have 4 shareholders. We have stakeholders. We have our shareholders. We have our employees. We have our customers. We have our communities. And obviously that community shareholder is relatively new to our Union Pacific in the last, 15 years. We impact those 7,000 communities. We don't sneak in and out of town, right? I mean, a locomotive doesn't.
No.
It's important that they know who to call, know to solve problems. But getting back to the question of the state chamber, I've seen state chambers around the country play a very pivotal role in shaping legislation that impacts the future of the state. I'm a Nebraska farm boy. I'm proud of Nebraska. I spent 20 years of my life in the Nebraska state capitol. The future of Nebraska is important to me. I'm done running for elective office for a variety of reasons, but I enjoy the work as the state chamber, and hopefully playing a role in my time there in charting a course for the future of Nebraska. That's what I think the state chamber is uniquely qualified as a statewide entity to do that.
Mm. Okay, so do you see a difference in an approach to leadership in these 3 different areas of corporate, government, chamber? Is there any difference there?
Uh, Certainly. I mean, I have a saying from Ronald Reagan's library over my shoulder here, but it's amazing what can get accomplished when nobody cares who gets the credit. And I still think that's important. Both in a political world and in a corporate world, there's a certain amount of people that are climbing the ladder who want to get credit and think they need credit to advance. I'm one of those people that, the harder the work, the luckier you get. And the harder you work, the more good things happen to you. And so, I think that's true about everything. But certainly in politics, there's certainly a deal of hyperbole you have to deal with and sort through. And in corporate America, there's corporate speak, which can be a safe haven and stuff like that. But in both those things, the important thing to separate yourself from, to get ahead on, is to earn the trust of people with your decision making. You're making a sound decision that's not a selfish decision. People can smell out a selfish decision or a self-promoter quickly, I think. When you've established yourself that you will make a decision in politics for the greater good and in business for the greater good of the organization you're running or the organization you're working in. And at least in my experience, over time, that works. Now, I'm in charge of public relations. Don't get me wrong. I know how to promote something. That's what I do on occasion. But I'm not one to think you need to over promote yourself. The way to promote yourself is to do, as I always tell people, the best way to get the next promotion is to do your present job extremely well. Now, I mean, that don't mean you never, never answer the question on what you did. You got to do that. But I mean, the overt person that does that too much, I think that tends to catch up with them in my experience. So be it politics or be it corporate government, they're kind of the same. And with the state chamber, any statewide association, there's people with different agendas doing different things. And the people with self-promotional agendas can rise quicker, but they don't last as long because people will notice that. So whereas the people with the more global agenda and more selfless agenda rise and get noticed over time, in my experience. And that's what I try and emulate. I probably don't do it all the time, but it's certainly what I try and emulate.
Do you think that that's the same today as it was 20 years ago?
I think so. Now, but the one thing that I'm very conscious of, it's easy for me as a white male with two parents who loved me and told me I could do things and got to go to college. I mean, there's one of those things where I can sound a little naive when you just work hard and do the right things, you get rewarded. I mean, that can be a little naive. There are people that don't have all the things that I had, and without them, life can turn out differently, and I understand that. So, fact of the matter is there some luck there? Absolutely. I think you make your luck by working hard and by recognizing when you need to raise your hand. And another thing I think is very important is you can't shy away from the hard stuff, and nor shy away from the mundane stuff. I mean, if you come off as too good to do something, people that work for you will ferret that out. And by the same token, when you shy away from the tough jobs, people know that. So the people, I always say, my best advice to people is you run to the fire, because the fire can get you burned, figuratively speaking. But that's how you separate yourself. I mean, in my life, I can go through some things where, a lot of people would say, don't go there, you're going to get in trouble. Because I went there, because I was, managed enough success to be recognized, that's how I advanced through various stages of my career.
And is that how you also advise people to demonstrate their genuine desire to help and have that selfless agenda, like you mentioned earlier?
I mean, it's you remember 20 years in politics where your job really is the public good, yeah. Right? I mean, that's what my job was in the legislature. Secretary of State is a little different. But then you transpose that to working for a corporation where, you really are, ultimately those four stakeholders I talked about, you got to work for. But I mean, there is a profit motive there, which is different than government. And so you got to be cognizant of that. But I think, in leadership in an organization of any kind, that selfless person will do the hard work, make the hard decision, give others the credit anytime they can. That is the ingredients for a successful leader, in my opinion.
It also is the ingredients for building up people or giving them the opportunity to really own their own voice and their experience and their agency. When leaders like you acknowledge them for what they've done, they really feel like they matter.
No, and and I was just having a conversation with one of my direct reports. I have my boss, my CEO, very, very intelligent, very confident. When he makes a decision on a personnel decision, he knows he made the right decision. He trusts them implicitly from the beginning, as he did with me, which I got a kick out of. I, on the other hand, am the other guy. You got to show me. I mean, just because you have the title itself, and maybe that comes from my career in politics, where there's a lot of state senators, but that don't mean just because they're a state senator doesn't mean they know what they're doing, theoretically. And so I am much more of the kind, I'm binary. Either I trust you or I don't. When I hire you, I don't trust you until you proven to me that I should. And that frustrates some people. You're asking me these second and third questions. Well, because I've not seen you, I don't inherently trust you that I know that you're asking those questions. And that could be called micromanaging by some, but that's how I am. And they're different people. And respect on my boss, I mean, when he gave me this title, I mean, the first day he walked in and expected me to solve the problem because that's the position he put me in. And so different things for different people.
It sounds like maybe you are also you're saying that this is how you build trust with me. And perhaps at some point you do pull back a little bit.
You have to ask people that work for me. I think I do. And you can move back and forth in that trust continuum.
Sure.
With me, there's people that, I thought maybe they were more, I'm a workhorse guy, not a show horse guy. And I've put people in the show horse category. And over time figured out I was wrong. They can do some, but they really are workhorses. And that's what I really like. And so, yes, you can get a lot of shortcuts with me over time because been there, done that. I know that you're asking that second and third question that's going to get me out, that when I walk into my boss or my board, that I know you've already thought about it. So I don't have to sit there and ask you. I don't sit there and ask you beforehand because I know you've been through that drill before and you're there with me. And it just, in my world, that takes time for me to trust that you're going to do that because I have to do that. That's what I get paid to do. And that you're working on the same level of detail, looking around corners, whatever it is that I want people to do. Maybe a quarter of the people that work for me have that inherent trust. The other 3/4 probably don't. I'm just saying that's
Yeah.
it. They may not like that. But there's varying degrees of that. But really, there's a group that they're the ones that I pick first, and they're the ones that are going to go charge the hill for me.
And it sounds like it's because of what you've seen and the
Yes.
results that they've gotten.
Yes, and it tends to be. I have some people with powerful resumes working for me that have done a lot of things, but it's still, could be a fault on my part. But still, it's what you've done in my world is what accelerates you. And I can recognize your talent, I can manage your talent, I can do things with your talent, and not be in that total trust category, right? Just because that's what I have to do.
Interesting. So when you really trust somebody, what kinds of things are you giving them to do or trusting them with?
Well, it depends on what their job is, right? But it can be, the person that's managing the bill in Oregon that I have to kill, or I have to get the governor to veto it. If that team up there, if I trust them, whether I win or lose, I know they've done all the right things. And I don't have to, did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? I don't have to go through that litany because I know they did all that.
Okay.
Whereas, person in Arizona, I'm going to get to them more about, I got to go explain why we lost something's going to cost us $1 million a year forever. So, did you do all the things you had to do to keep that happening? And how did you do it? And did you see it coming? Most importantly, did the people you paid in that capital see it coming? Now, the same token, people that serve the dinners on the train, that has to be a special experience. That's my commissary crew. You get on a UP train, anybody in the world can serve you a dinner at any hotel. It's pretty nice. But people that get on a UP train, we want to give them an exceptional experience. And that means, making sure the glass is full. That means, recognizing that's a vegetarian plate they didn't ask for, but I'm going to find it for you. Things like that. That's what their job is, to make that a special experience. I know the ones that are good at it. And that's, so we literally have presidents on our train. That's the person that's going to handle the president.
Okay. So one of the questions that I've been asking leaders recently has to do with their leadership philosophy. So what are things that are most important to you when you consider what it means to be a leader?
Well, first of all, know what you don't know. and own it when you make a mistake. That's you don't have to fill the room with words when you don't know what you're talking about, and that'll hurt you. And so I just, and I already said about you got to run to the fire to take the hard job. I think all those things, knowing what you don't know and listening, run to the fire and showing that you'll make a hard decision and admitting when you're wrong, which is important to that. That's a continuum, and I think an important leadership philosophy that has worked for me, and it's what I look for in others.
It sounds like taking ownership, taking responsibility, taking initiative, those three things sound like what you're describing.
Yes, and proper initiative. An initiative for the right reasons.
Okay.
I always think that's important.
I would love to hear more about what the right reasons would be, or what you mean by that.
Well, it's my perception of the right reasons, right? If it's, once again, whether it's in public office of doing something for the greater good that you believe in, and or people who elect you want you to do. They may or may not be one and the same, but you have to recognize that and do it. And then in any sort of a corporate team or workplace, once again, I can make decisions on who we give $25 million in philanthropic gifts out. I can give to things that empower me, Scott Moore, or I can give things that empower UP way after Scott Moore's gone. That's an example of I think for the right reasons, for the long-term good, not just about your career, not just about your point in time today. Long term is harder to do, and that's why our founding fathers, they didn't elect a true democracy. They elected a representative government, where your job is to look at the facts and make your decision what's best for people, as opposed to take a poll and just do what everybody wants to do. That's not, go back to Plato and the 6 degrees of democracy. The popular opinion, the demagogues take over. Representative government, you're elected to use your judgment. That's what they elect you for. Sometimes, that can be difficult. And trust me, you can look at my record, and I didn't do the tough thing all the time. I didn't do the right thing all the time, certainly in politics. Don't do it. There's fights I pick in a corporate level. Sometimes, that one, I can read the tea leaves. That one's not going to happen. There's no reason to go fight that battle today. You got to be willing to do that. I know people that cannot read that. You have to getting back to knowing people enough to read the room and to count your votes. That's important. You can't fight every day and win every day. You have to pick your battles, find the ones you can win because they mean something to you, and then figure out a way to win, whatever that is. If it's changing the dress code, or if it's changing how we invest $1 billion, either one. They're all the same. It's kind of the same thing in both of them.
Sure. Interesting. Okay. You've shared a lot of leadership lessons. Is there anything in particular that you haven't shared yet that you would like to share about something that you've learned over the years?
Well, there's like 4 phases of my life, and 4 phases where I started at the bottom, got to the top. And so, farm kid, started in 4-H when I was a kid. And I got white ribbons at a speech contest. I was that bad, but I listened to what the judge told me. And for the time I graduated from high school, I was, state champion in speech, but, getting purple ribbons in speech and purple ribbons and showing my cattle. Went from worst to best by listening and doing the work to get it done. So that was before I was 20. Then in college, I'm the farm kid that, goes to the university, belongs to a fraternity that's a wide range of people, from rich Omaha kids to Army kids from Sarpy County. I come in don't do well. I had 10 kids in my class. I go to college and nobody cares if I go to class. Maybe I won't go. And so after I about flunked out, knuckled down and went from being the awkward farm kid to president of my fraternity by the time I left there. Then moving into my legislative career, youngest senator, brash, saying things now I would never say now that I'm 60 years old, but never let, but by the time I left there, I was arguably the chairman of the budget committee, one of the most powerful positions there because I'd worked through people, I'd worked with people, stuff like that. Same here. So I start over again in a corporate environment when I'm 40 years old. And, at the time there's 60,000 people in the company. Now there's 33,000 people in the company, and started doing a job, did my job, hopefully the right way. And now I'm one of the top 10 people in the company. So, from 4-H to my fraternity to politics to corporate America, all that things from starting at the bottom, those lessons I talked about, they work for me. That doesn't mean they work for everybody. I understand there's luck involved. I understand there's certain things that people can't overcome for a variety of reasons in a place they are. And so, but it's happened to me in a many way in all 4 of those stages of my life. So that's why I believe.
Sometimes people have ideas. Maybe people bring ideas to you, or they might bring ideas to their supervisor at work. What do you recommend about how people approach their supervisor when they have ideas that they think would make things better, that would be a good change, but it's their own idea? How do they approach that?
Well, first off, approach it as an idea as opposed to a decided fact, right? The point is you have to socialize something.
Yeah.
I do this. Yeah. People surprise me. Like, we've never talked to that before. Why are you saying that? You have to kind of set it up, right? It doesn't just happen fat and cold. The way you make me mad is to surprise me with something that's too baked and we didn't talk about it. And so the important thing is I am thinking about this, and I do this with my bosses I have over here's the thought I have. Well, that's a bad idea. I don't want to do that. Well, a week later, I'm going to bring this up again because I actually think we need to think about something here. What is it that we want to do? And I'm a big believer that people support what they themselves create. The point being, you can't tell them, here's the idea, here's what we're going to do. When you do that, they don't own it. They don't have a piece of it. It's very important that you socialize, certainly on the scope of the change, socialize it, which gets back to the title part of things. Just because I can make that decision doesn't mean I should make that decision if I've not listened to everyone and I don't understand the impact of that. And I think when you prove to people that is how you make decisions, by listening to people, understanding the impact to them, to their customers, to the community, whatever it is. Over time, that's when people will buy in, because they think you're making the decisions with that in mind, as opposed to I'm the boss, therefore I can, and therefore you will. That doesn't work. I don't think. It didn't work for me, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work in the leaders that I know.
I think you can get compliance with that, but you can't necessarily get.
You don't get buy-in.
Yep, exactly. So the idea of socializing an idea is so important. How do you do that in such a big company when you have maybe a company-wide change, something that's just going to have to, maybe there will have to be compliance for a while, but eventually you do want to get buy-in. How do you socialize those kinds of ideas throughout a company?
Well, I run the communications. I run our internal communications. So there are times where we have to, you're talking about how do you impact culture? And that is something we are always grappling with. And once again, you come from a railroad that tends to be a command and control environment. That's the way we keep things safe by doing a safety briefing every time, and repetition, and stuff like that. So, but still, there on a enterprise-wide basis, I truly believe transparency and radical transparency can help you, and there can be a short-term pain to that, because when you go from a situation because I said so, because I'm the boss, to a situation of, here's the real reason we want to do this, is because our safety record is such, and you need to go do that 3 times instead of once, because once wasn't working. But tell them that. I mean, in a very simple way, tell them why you're affecting change, and how you communicate that is not about, you got those 4 stakeholders. If you just say, I'm doing this because Wall Street tells me, that doesn't work. I'm doing it because my customer asked me. I'm doing it because the majority of employees wanted it when it wasn't the right thing, or the mayor of that community wants me, those reasons, because you have to, for any one of those stakeholders, ultimately don't work for buy-in. And so enterprise-wide, you have to, whether it's how you're going to work from home, what the rules are going to be. I mean, you can, polling. I mean, polling does help. Focus groups helps. Once again, it's listening and really finding out where people are, which, that's why people do polling, because to figure out what are people thinking. I'm going to go fishing where the fish are, and I'm going to get close to that pond and know enough. That's why I need to do this is going to work here. And as opposed to, they are thinking radically different than I am. They just, that they are not in the same thought process as me. Therefore, I can't force that one now. Maybe I do half a loaf now and see if I can get cultural buy-in, and then you go to the next loaf after that. But it's all about judging. I talk about doability. Well, what is the doability of something? I mean, once again, I'm the boss, therefore you can do it that way. You don't get buy-in doing it that way. You don't get cultural change doing it that way.
Yeah, what you're describing sounds a little bit like meeting people where they are, but drawing them forward.
Yes, absolutely.
How have you seen the emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion shift over the years?
Well, two moments. I mean, one, obviously the first 2 weeks of June 2020, after the George Floyd incident, was a seismic change on what is acceptable and expected in corporate America. I remember what I said to my boss on Sunday, what we ought to do in reaction to that was wrong by Tuesday. And as far as, do we say something internally? Do we say something externally? I mean, that was just a moment in time where corporate America, we went from June 1st, roughly, and then having protests that had some bad apples to them that broke our windows, that we'd have never had Black Lives Matter anywhere near our building on June 1. By July 15, the windows broken, we covered up with signs that Black Lives Matter. Now, that was a period of 45 days where that would have been unheard of on June 1. By July 15, for all the right reasons, it was acceptable. And so that was an immediate change. And but more importantly, I'm from rural Nebraska. I remember the first African American kid I met at 4-H camp. That's not how I grew up. And so the power and importance of diversity was not something that I thought much about. Didn't have to. But as you get into corporate America, and it really, the whole line about bringing a diverse group to the table to make a decision makes a better decision is so true. I went out and worked in the West Coast for the railroad, and I had lucky. I hired 3 different Latinas that went to work for me that read me well enough to know. They would socialize things with me, but they thought about the world radically different than I did. And I need to go into their community and talk about stuff. So instead of me talking about, like I would talk to my community in rural York County, I need to talk to them, one, in their language. I can't speak Spanish, but find somebody that does. and 2, understand what they're going through. And so the whole point of that was the real life experience. Had I not listened to my diverse hirees, I would have never been successful in my job, because LA would have burned our tracks down and hated us. But by, once again, meeting them where they are, understanding where people were, listening to my diverse workforce that worked for me and wanted to help me, we made better decisions. And that's why it's, Nebraskans, as a rule, tend to say we're nice people, so that's not important to us. Diversity is hard, and you have to work at it. And it's important you work at it. And it's important we, as here in Nebraska, we work at it because we want it to be a welcoming place. I need Omaha, Nebraska to be a welcoming place so I can bring a diverse workforce here that feels included. And it's not just, the diverse, I can recruit and pay for diversity at UP. It takes a village for inclusion, because if I hire a diverse workforce that's not feeling at home when they get outside my building, they won't stay here and I'll lose that talent. And I need that talent to be a Fortune 150 company that we want to be.
Any thoughts on how to encourage inclusion within a community?
Well, that's one of the things when you're a big company in town, you can talk about it and say why it's important. That's the one thing. We've done some things in our company where, some statewide efforts where we've talked about that, because, it's good business, and B, it's important. And it's not just some East Coast ideologically egghead idea. It's what you need to be better. And so that's why, that's why Union Pacific, we've leaned in very hard on the topic, because, as a, Midwest-based conservative railroad, they don't think of us being, the group that talks about that. And so that's why we use that as an opportunity to say, if we are thinking about it, like our UP Foundation, we get thousands of local grant opportunities. Last year we said, if you want a grant from us, you have to tell me how you're thinking about diversity. And the point being, in rural America, because you don't have to think about it if you don't want to, quite honestly. That's not no rub against anybody. You don't have to. I want you to does your board represent your community? Do you have training on D&I? And you just need to tell me how you're thinking about diversity. I'll still give you money. But if you don't even want to answer that question, then we're not going to give you UP Foundation money. And it's one of those things where we're a bit unique, because we go every little burg between here and the West Coast. And that's one of the little things we've done to try and help that community understand why thinking about diversity in whatever club, nonprofit club you work on, that's important. We think if you do it there, you'll do it at the restaurant, you'll do it at the ball game, and that'll help everybody understand why it's important, and hopefully embrace a willingness to do something more about it and not see it as an enemy or something bad.
That's interesting. What's your perspective on the future of work? A lot of things changing. Obviously, a lot of things changing. A lot of issues that I'm sure you're experiencing with just transportation in general. What do you want to say about that?
Well, a couple. There. Obviously on our trains. COVID was a great example. 30,000 employees, 5,000 management employees, arguably in some fashion could work from home. 25,000 union employees couldn't work from home because, unless you could teleport a train, you had to get on it and move it, right? And load it and inspect it. So that became an interesting communication issue for me as the communicator, because there's this whole universe in our headquarters building that's work from home was happening. And they were very, interested in how to do it. And there was that whole group of people that couldn't work from home. So how you had to communicate, you couldn't overly dwell on the management side, because your field operations couldn't work like that. And so, having said that, with trains, automation has happened. Automation's happened forever, right? There used to be 5 people on a train when it went by. A brakeman, a fireman, and people in the caboose. Cabooses are gone. Those don't happen. There's a rear end device that does all that. There's 2 people in our cab now. Now, autonomous vehicles are coming. They're coming on our highways. And I would submit that if you can have an autonomous truck on a freeway, it's probably safer to have an autonomous train on a fixed guideway that can't go anywhere. That's an easier place to do it. But, there's workforce issues. We have to, figure that out. And so, there's productivity that's going to, but in that case, so there's still a whole bunch of work that needs to be done around the railroad. So instead of having two people in the cab, there's one person in the cab, and the other person, instead of being in the cab, is working a regular shift in their community, so they're knowing people and know everything that's going on there, and have a better quality of life. So that in our field side, that's one side of it. Management side, office people side, working from home. Yeah, I am a little old-fashioned on that one. I'm the person. Work can happen at home, but careers are built in the office through the collaboration, through understanding people. And so you need to find a mix there. And so, hopefully, I think we learned that there are some things you can do remote, and there's some great opportunities to do things remote. But ultimately, you have to be in the room and be with people to understand each other and cooperate. So you don't have to be there 40 hours a week, 8 to 5, but you do have to be there in some fashion. You do have to work together, or you really can't maximize what you can do as a team. Now, there's some tech people that probably really don't need to go to the office. I'm not saying everybody is, but from a management side, you need to have some face time and some cooperation.
And relationship building, it sounds like, too.
Yes.
Be able to, you're talking about building the career. That's a huge piece of that. Okay. So it's been great. This has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for visiting with me today, Scott, and sharing your experience and your wisdom with our listeners. And I've got one more question for you. And that is, what last piece of advice would you want to give somebody who would like to have a voice of influence?
Well, it's like, I'll be a bit repetitive, but it's one of those things where know what you don't know, own your mistakes, learn from your mistakes, learn from losing. Those are the things that work for me. I think they ideally work for others. And you have to have a work ethic and a self-checked ego that lets you do all those things.
Thank you so much. It's great to talk to you today.
Okay. Thank you, Andrea.